Welcome to The Explainer, where we get right to the heart of the story using the source material itself. Today we're looking at a single border crossing, the Rafah crossing, and a controversy that has two very different sides.
Okay, so let's get right into it. You've got this one border crossing, the main way out of Gaza that isn't controlled by Israel, and a recent decision to open it for people to leave but not come back has just ignited a firestorm. So what is really going on here?
Well, on one hand, Israel is calling this a temporary humanitarian move, for people who need urgent medical help. But then you flip it around, and the counter-narrative is, well, it's a lot darker. It's seen as a calculated plan for what's being called soft displacement, a way to push Palestinians out of Gaza for good.
All right, so let's start with Israel's official side of the story. How are they explaining this one-way opening? What do they say is the bigger picture here?
So according to Israeli Knesset member Akram Hassan, this whole thing kicked off with a phone call, a direct call from the American president to Prime Minister Netanyahu. And the stated purpose was purely humanitarian, to let anyone who needs serious medical treatment get out of Gaza.
But here's where it gets really interesting. This move isn't being presented as just a one-off action. No, it's framed as step one in a bigger two-phase plan. This humanitarian opening comes first, but it's meant to be followed by a very different step two, the complete disarmament of Hamas.
Okay, but that brings up the big question, right? Why only one way out? If it's a humanitarian gesture, why can't people come back in? Well, the Israeli argument points the finger squarely at Hamas. They claim Hamas broke a previous deal about returning all hostage remains, and that forced their hand.
All right, so that's one side. Now let's completely switch gears and look at the counter-narrative, which, as you'll see, paints a much more alarming picture. This perspective comes to us from Egyptian researcher Dr. Bashir Abdel-Fattah.
He says, forget humanitarian gesture, he calls this soft displacement. And the idea behind it is pretty chilling. You don't have to force people out with guns and tanks. You can get the same result by just making life so impossible, so unbearable, that people feel like they have no other choice but to leave on their own, quote-unquote, voluntarily.
And Dr. Abdel-Fattah does not mince words here. He believes this is just a rebrand of an old Israeli objective, the mass transfer of Palestinians out of Gaza. The name might have changed to something that sounds a little better, but the goal, in his view, is exactly the same. And he points to what he sees as a clear pattern of actions to back this up. He argues that this one-way opening violates past agreements, that the U.S. might be complicit, and that deliberately delaying reconstruction in Gaza is all part of a coordinated effort to make life there just unsustainable.
So you can see how this whole thing really hangs on one fundamental question about a previous ceasefire deal. Who broke it first? Because the answer to that question changes the entire story.
And this is a classic he said, she said. Israel's claim is very specific. Hamas had 72 hours to return all hostage remains, and they failed. But the counterclaim says, come on, there's only one body left, and Israel is just using this as a convenient excuse, a pretext, to tear up the whole agreement and do what it wanted to do anyway.
And to bolster that argument, Dr. Abdel-Fattah puts out a pretty staggering number, 600. That's how many times he alleges Israel has violated the ceasefire since October 10th, arguing that they, not Hamas, are the ones who are consistently breaking the rules.
So, with all this back and forth, you've got to wonder about Egypt, right? They're the country that physically controls the other side of the Rafah crossing. This whole situation puts them in a really tough spot.
And this is a big deal. Even though Israel and the U.S. have kind of suggested there was coordination with Egypt on this, Cairo came out with a very firm, very public denial. They're saying, nope, we were not part of any deal for a one-way opening.
And Egypt's position seems crystal clear. They've basically drawn a diplomatic red line. First, they are absolutely against any kind of Palestinian displacement. Second, they're warning about what they call an Israeli hybrid war of misinformation. They're also pointing out, hey, Israel controls 7 other crossings. And finally, they insist that if Rafah opens, it has to be for people to go in and out.
So you see, this isn't just some small dispute over a border crossing. The potential fallout here is massive, and it could seriously affect the entire region.
And you can almost see how it could play out, like a series of dominoes falling. It starts right here, with this tension at Rafah. That creates diplomatic strain between Egypt and Israel, a relationship that's been a cornerstone of stability for decades. Then, other regional powers like Turkey and Iran are watching very closely. And before you know it, the whole situation could spiral into a much wider, much more dangerous conflict.
And that's not just us speculating. Dr. Abdel Fattah leaves us with this really stark warning. He fears that what he calls the arrogance of Israeli power could be the spark that reignites the entire Middle East, with consequences that could be totally unpredictable.
And that brings us to the final critical question. Is the Rafah crossing a humanitarian pressure valve, a desperately needed lifeline for people in need? Or is it the trigger, the one thing that could set a whole new conflict in motion? It really shows you how a single geopolitical flashpoint, one spot on a map, can hold the fate of an entire region in the balance.